All right. Clap one on three. One, two, three. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash, and as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the mostess, Christy Oxborrow. How you feeling?
I'm gonna be honest. I'm a grump today.
She's a grump.
I am. I know that's not the way I know it should always be, like light and having a great time. I'm a grump. I shouldn't be. I'm here with my favorite gal.
Yeah.
Um, my team won tonight with 21 seconds left on the clock.
Wowzer.
Couldn't have been happier with that. I mean there was a I'm not going to get into it because I will get more emotional than a grown ass woman has the right to be. We did trade one of my favorite players and a very good defensive player in a moment where we have multiple defensive players injured. Um, but everybody seems very excited about it, so it is what it is. But the worst thing in my life, I had a small um dental surgery today,
Oh,
and
God.
it means I'm not allowed straws for the next 3 days.
What?
I can't use any sort of straw.
What the hell kind of rule is that?
I mean, yeah, it makes sense in the grand scheme of things for what I had done, but it's the idea that as a treat, often if I do anything, as a treat, I
Yeah.
like a 7-Eleven pit stop. And every single time I've dealt with the dentist, I'm like, I can't physically go to 7-Eleven because like half of my face is frozen and I just can't deal with it right now. But I'm like, tomorrow, I'll go tomorrow. But no, this time I have to wait unless I want to get it and just eat it with a spoon in the hopes that it'll be thick enough I can do that. But that might just be too much of a tease, so I have to let it go. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll just get like a that strawberry lemonade I love so much. And then it's like, oh, well, I it's got so much ice in it, and the idea of drinking that without a lid or a straw, I'm like, that feels no. Um, and for the remainder of the day, I mean, this appointment was at like 1 in the afternoon. The remainder of the day, I'm on soft foods. And so far, all I've eaten in the last 8 hours is pudding, and I couldn't be sadder about it.
That is, yeah.
It's depressing. It's really depressing. It was also, and I won't say the details. Um, every time I'm there, it's a horror show, and I think, oh, the next one can't be as bad because it's something different. It won't be nearly as bad. I didn't know what I was signing up for today. I went in with what I thought was going to happen,
Right.
and then they said, oh, no, we don't do that. This is how it's getting done. And it was a much more violent
Did
thing
you
than
think
I
you were getting put
expected.
under?
No, it's just I thought that um basically I had to have a tooth pulled. And I thought I had seen that they, of course, they will give you the freezing, but that they will like break the tooth in certain spots and take out little pieces or take it out like in 4 or 5 chunks or whatever. No, no, they basically take some sort of vice like grip and, oh, let's twist again. just and just a twist until it's ready. Mm-hmm. Oh,
Did you have laughing gas at least?
well, they did do freezing. Um, they did the freezing on one side, and then she goes partway through. She goes, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to give you freezing on the inside." And I'm gonna say this: the last time I went and had to have something specific done, I had to have freezing on the inside of my upper gums. And for the next 2 weeks, that part of my mouth was so raw. It felt like someone just stabbed me in the gums repeatedly and just like set it on fire because like I could barely put a French fry in my mouth before that side of my body was like, oh, we hate this. We hate this. This is the worst. So I was starting to get concerned that something wasn't right. So then I spoke to the dentist about it and I was like, is this a problem? Like, is that okay? And she goes, oh, that's what happened to you? And I went, yeah. And she goes, oh, this sucks. I hate to tell you, it's incredibly rare, but some people do react to the freezing and the medicine on that part of their mouth in that way. And I'm like, wait, it's rare? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, but I have it. And she's like, yeah. And the fact that they had to do that today, I'm in for a ride for the next 2 weeks.
This is hell. No one
Yeah.
deserves this less than you. For the
I even
record,
left
like,
out the worst details. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad, but great news is it's done for now. And yeah, I'm here. I'm choking down a water because it's pretty much all I can do in this moment. And we're just all the rest of it, you know?
what I'm hearing is a justifiable grump.
Sure.
She's
Sure.
grump. She's grump. She's grump. She's had dental work.
Thank you so much. Again, Weird Al, look out.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things I would offer also though is that you have to be frozen, of course, but then they I mean, in these situations, I feel like they give laughing gas on top of that because it just makes you loopy so that you're not as aware of what's happening.
Oh, I assume I couldn't have laughing gas because I was also on Ativan
Oh,
100%. So I went in there like relaxed and my legs couldn't fully like I had to hard focus on how to walk because my legs were very jello-y, like those
sure.
toys from our youth where you push the bottom and their whole bodies fall.
Yeah.
Like my legs
Yeah.
felt like that at all times. So I have to like look at the floor and like count my steps and watch where I'm going because I'm out of it. Um, but that's mostly just to get me in the building. But yeah, there was a part where she was like, I could try and give you more, but she's like, I'll be honest, it's right now it's just pressure that's killing you, and no amount of pain meds is gonna take the pain of the pressure away. And I was like, cool, 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 cool. Yep. Just do her up. Let's go. Let's do it. Just continue on, please. But look, that's over and done with, and I don't have to think about it anymore, except for in my nightmares.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they didn't do a lovely job. I'm sure it wasn't as bad as the trauma that initially scared me of the doctor. So that's something.
Hey.
It's just new traumas now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It took me many dentists until I'm with the dentist that I'm with now.
Sure.
And uh even still, and this is the best I've ever had, probably.
Hey.
Even still, I find it all traumatic. I don't love it.
Oh yeah.
I don't like having somebody touch inside my mouth. You know what I mean?
Oh, I hate it.
I think
I
it's more invasive than we really are given credit for.
Oh yeah, it's the lean back in the chair and I'm gonna put you in a position and I'm gonna put my hands in there and then I'm not interested. I also can't take the camera. To
Mm.
which I went, do they not come smaller? The technology we have now in society, we can't get those smaller to
You
do
mean
an
the X-ray
X-ray?
machine?
Yeah, the little X-ray thing that goes in your mouth. I was like, could we get that smaller? And she's like, that's as small as it comes. I'm like, is it? Okay. Like we've had to do it in multiple ways. When I called to make an appointment there originally, I really hammered home that I had a very traumatic experience and I'm incredibly anxious on top of that. And so this is like going at all is a very big deal. And whatever. So everybody who has seen my chart there absolutely babies me.
Right.
because they obviously wrote something that was like sheeny, gentle gloves with this one. You know what I mean? So they are always incredibly sweet to me. I'm sure they're incredibly sweet to everybody, but they always are like extra gentle. And every single person that sees me is like, "How you doing? Are you okay?" Like a very gentle voice because they know I'm a ticking time bomb, emotionally speaking. And they've had to come up with plans to get X-rays to just make it work because I mean, it's always that bit, that joke where it's like, it's totally safe for you to be in this room. I, however, have to leave. And so you're like, wait, it's
Wait
safe
a
for me to
second.
sit here. And they're like, well, I'll put this thing over your lap, but then I'm gonna leave. And I'm like, even if what if you're wearing one of those aprons? Wouldn't it be safe? No, no, then I've got to leave. Well, there was we've she told me like once she hits the button, if I hear the beep, I yank it out of my mouth because I can't stand it. I just can't stand it in my mouth. And so we ended up having to do a thing where she put one of the vests that they usually put over me. She puts the vest over me. She puts it kind of half over herself. And she goes, "Can someone hit the button?" As they're like walking past to quickly take it so she can like take it out immediately.
Okay, we're gonna need to talk about the logistics about this a little bit more. Hold on here. So
Yeah.
you're talking to me about them taking x-rays of your teeth, and
Yeah.
you're describing them putting a tiny camera in your mouth? It's
Well,
not the
it's,
thing on the side?
oh no, this is like I'm going to say like a 2 inch. I love that. I wish I had something nearby.
You have so many little things everywhere.
It's like a two. That is a great call. Well, I'll say this. It's probably as wide as this little Pizza Hut pizza
Get
box,
out of town.
but it's taller. And there's like a weird thing that comes off of it that goes in and you have to bite down on that thing.
Oh, yes, I have had this. See, they didn't used to do it that way. It used to be a little, you put the little cardboard disc thing in there, and then it
Mm,
was just on the outside. I have had that. I hate that too.
I hate it because I
It,
can't take it.
here's my question. Do they make them for children? They do. They must.
I
There must
assume
be
they
a
must.
sudder one for children. Could I have the child's one? This is one question I
Oh,
have for
great call.
dentists. And if there is anyone in the dental industry who'd like to answer this for me, I
Sure.
feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
Here's my question. And
Hmm.
I've probably talked about this on the show before. And if I haven't, we're about to all get a little bit closer. I have an abnormally small mouth. And I know what you're thinking.
Sure.
That's impossible. But inside, it's small. I say this every time I go to a new dentist. They never believe me until they
Mm,
get in there with some instrument, some like the thing you're describing, and then
yep.
I'm choking, I'm gagging. There's no room for
Yep.
it. When
Yeah.
they were doing impressions for me to get a bite guard once, this was years ago, not my current dentist. By the way, everything I'm saying is not about my current dentist.
Sure.
Um, when I was getting those done, I said to them, I was like, those trays are too big. They're too big for my mouth. And they were like, that's not true, blah, blah, blah. And then they put them in, and guess what? They were too big for my mouth. So here's my question. First of all, why doesn't anyone believe me? Second of all, couldn't you just use the child size one? What do you
Mhm.
get out of it, dental professionals? What do you
Yeah.
get out of it? What does it matter? Try the child one for me. And then if the child one is too small, then I can say, I apologize, you win. But like,
Yeah.
paying out
Yeah.
of pocket for most of this shit. Can't I then just try the child one? Because, maybe we'll both be pleasantly surprised and it will just make my experience better.
Oh, I always find it insane when you say to like a medical professional in some way, like, "Oh, this is how it is." And they go, "No." I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, that's the main reason why I have a trauma with the dentist to begin with, because
right.
I got the freezing in the procedure that I was doing. Um, and they were like, "Okay, well, let me know if it's not enough freezing." They went in a little bit to test, and I went, "Oh, that's not enough." And they went, "You'll be fine. Be a big girl." And they continued on, even though I was like, "That is absolutely not enough freezing." Since then, I've learned redheads require extra.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Couldn't be happier.
My thing too for me, from a family of redheads, by the way, one of the
Yep.
non-redheads of the bunch, um, is it takes longer for the anesthetic to kick in for me.
Oh,
So
sure.
I've gotten it in the amount of time it's supposed to take, and then it doesn't. And then they give me more and it's still not doing it. So then I end up feeling half of everything that's going on. And then when I'm leaving, I'm like,
Mhm.
there it is. Like it takes like a full hour, hour and a half for it to kick in for me for some reason. Another question for you, medical professionals, who I assume are listening to this show.
Why wouldn't they be?
Am I the only human? I can't believe that to be true. I can't believe I'm the only human that it takes a long time for freezing to work for. There's gotta be others,
Oh, I'm sure there are.
like the Nether Nudes. There's dozens of us. Dozens. Shout out Arrested Development. But you know what I mean? I guess the big thing is that, if the dental industry specifically is curious as to why it's tough to get customers, you
Yeah.
know, I feel like everybody has a story that's like,
Oh,
you know?
I'm sure of it. I
Huh.
mean, my initial, trauma was done by a very specific gentleman who, anybody, in my life since who has heard my story, has been like, "Oh, was it this guy?" And I'm like, "Yes." Every single time they know, because he should not, he might still be practicing, but he shouldn't be. Um, but it's just the fact that everybody knows. I'm not saying that being a dentist is easy.
No.
And again, I adore the place I go now because they're all incredibly sweet and gentler on me than I think they need to be. I appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think today's trauma wasn't her fault. There wasn't going to be anything that she could have done
Yeah.
that could have not made it traumatic. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, I look at it as a win because I did what I needed to do, but I'm gonna be pretty sad for the next several days to go, um, without, without my usual treat. That's all I want. Does it mean I'm gonna fuck things up in, like, 4 days and have 2 of them in 1 day? Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Does it also mean I'll probably get one of those damn strawberry lemonades tomorrow, but just drink it precariously without a lid and, like, sip on it and just accept it? Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna need something fun to
Well,
consume to
you
make up
earned it.
for it.
You earned it.
I feel like I have. I really
I
do.
kn I'm gonna tell you something. I know that you have.
Oh, well, look, I am reward based.
Yep.
It's who I am. It's how I've always been. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it
Hell no.
because reward based still gets shit done.
Yeah.
It just means I laid on the couch for most of the day. Okay. Also, speaking of that, does anybody else do this? I know that this is like some sort of mental issue that I have. So I knew that I was doing this appointment this afternoon because these are the kind of appointments you have to, they book very far in advance. So I knew. I totally forgot about it when we arranged to record tonight, but I knew. If nothing else, the gauze is out and I'm audible. But I knew I had this appointment this afternoon and I was like, oh, I bet when I come home, I'm going to be pretty useless and just want to lay around and rest. Especially looking back now, having having gone through a trauma, I'm going to want to lay down. So I'm
Yeah.
like so I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to want to rest." So what did my brain say that morning? I went, "You know what? Oh god, I should make up for my being lazy later and I guess I'll just clean the house." So I like did the dishes and I was going all over the place cleaning things. And then I was finally like, what am I doing? I don't have to justify ever sitting down and doing nothing. But my brain was like, you got to do something to make up for it. It's balance. It's what you got to do. And I'm like, does anybody else do that? I feel like everybody does.
Oh,
Like, I
yeah.
feel like a lot of people do.
I'm the same way. I think we need to reframe rest as not being lazy.
Correct.
I think that
Yeah.
that's a big thing for people from our generation too.
Oh, yes.
I don't know that the next generation feels that as hard as we do from from
From what I've
from the
witnessed of my
TikToks.
own children,
Yeah.
I would say they absolutely do not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I do the same thing. I mean, I've been look, here's the truth. It's March 7th. My Christmas decorations are still up. That's the truth. Every time
Good for you.
I go to take them down,
Yeah.
I just don't have the energy because I'm working just a beast of an amount of hours.
Yeah.
And then I say to myself, well, I have a few hours off on blank day. I guess I better do it so that I'm not lazy. And then
Yeah.
it's like my body literally sometimes just won't move. Yesterday I worked a very long day. I came home, I made dinner, I ate, I sat on the couch. I'm not moving. I'm not moving at
Yeah.
all. I'm completely at stillness.
Yep.
And my knee pops and it's been in pain ever since. And that to me is again, this is
Mhm.
I think it's a couple things. One, this aging is not there's a reason why before modern technology we were dead by now. You know what you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not ideal.
The slow
Not ideal.
breakdown is just it's begun. That's the first thing. Second thing is that I think it's honestly my body going, You're not moving right now. You're sitting. You're gonna
Yeah.
stay down.
Oh, yeah, just your full on body saying, "Stay down.
Stay down.
Take a
It's time to
rest."
rest. You need to rest." And I say the same for you.
I think well, I mean, I remind you that last year, the day I took down my Christmas tree, I filled Easter eggs for Easter the following day.
That's
So
right.
and last year, Easter was, I believe, April. So I think I you're in good company, for one thing.
That's been, you know what? That's become my new goal. I'm like, I just got to try and get it down for Easter. I got a couple more weeks. But here's the thing. This is just, it's classic me because I have one more week of work.
Sure.
And then, of course, well, I got an offer to play the Viper Room with my band. And then what? Am I not going to do that?
As if you're not gonna do it.
Come on. So then it's like I'm going straight from work into this week where I'm going to have to do rehearsals and all of the above. But that's a
Mhm.
joy, that's a
Of
joy. That's what
course.
makes life worth living. Also, it's March 22nd in Los Angeles, California. You can get tickets in the bio at my personal Instagram, Lauren Elizabeth Ash. Um, would love to see you. I mean, it's just going to be a hoot and a half, and I'm going on early. I'm on at 7:45-ish, and that's a dream
Hey.
for me because normally in the rock and roll world, it's like you may not hit the stage till 11:15, and I can't get friends to come out at that hour. I can't get anyone
Oh,
to come out at that hour.
who's not in bed at that hour?
The rocksters. The
Well,
rocksters. Her knee goes and she ages 25 fucking years. There it
yeah.
is. The
Well,
rockers is what I meant to say.
of course, but I can't wait for your next EP, The Rocksters. I like that
Oh
a
God.
lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the sentiment, and I think we absolutely need to adopt it where you're taking out the idea that rest is ever lazy.
Yeah. It's
Because you're
not.
right, we were raised to be like, "Well, if you're sitting down? What do you do all day, lazy bones?" And it's like, "I can't."
You got time to lean, you got time to clean.
Oh, yep, there it is. Well,
Yeah.
oh god, if that generation had any clue what they've done to us.
I saw a very funny TikTok the other day. I'll just say it very quickly. Um, I'll try and send it to you. It was it was a Gen Z who was like, "I think it's time. I think we have to turn to the millennials for help." And then it was stitched with this guy who was like, I'm not doing this any justice, but he was basically like, "Oh, I never thought the time would come that you'd come to us." And it just for some reason, it just
Mhm.
slayed me so hard. But then he was going on about like, "When we were your age, we knew better than to bug the Generation Xers." And it was just the way the whole thing was presented that I was like, "It's so accurate. It's so true. It's
Yeah.
so true." And
Oh,
listen, that's not to say we don't wanna help out Gen Z. We're not saying no.
sure.
We're just saying we're broken, guys.
Yeah. Oh, I'm fairly certain they know.
Yeah.
They must know by now.
Yeah. Well, if there's anything, I think TikTok's bringing us together. It allows us to learn about Gen Z. It learns them to learn, allows them to learn about millennials and the differences and how beautiful we can celebrate it all together in one milieu.
Peace.
I don't think I even used milieu properly, but if you confidently use a French word, people tend to think you're using it correctly.
I I just absolutely assumed that you were.
God bless you. Well, listen, before we get into the case, which of course is The Keepers Part 2, the second in our Boffo two-part series. Um, Boffo, I don't, again, one knee ache,
Yeah.
and I'm just aging by the second. Um, we have to get serious for a second, because there was, of course, a very small and tragic update. We, of course, covered sister wives on the program very recently. I want to say, what, 3 weeks ago? I don't. Time is tough.
I love that I couldn't even tell you what
I know. It was
number it
recent.
was. It was
It
in
was very, very
January, I
recent.
think.
Right.
Isn't it? I don't know.
Um, Unfortunately, in the news, just in the past couple of days, there was a story that came out, of course, about Garrison Brown, who's the son of Cody and Mary.
Janelle.
Excuse me, Janelle. Yes. And unfortunately, very tragically, Garrison has passed, has taken his own life, and we obviously just wanted to address that here on the show since we covered their story so
Yeah.
very recently. And then this hit, and just such tragic, awful news. There's no good way to spin it.
There's not. There's not. I mean, he was only 25 years old.
Mm,
I can't even begin to imagine what even his friends are going through, but
yeah,
especially the family because of how close they were. And I mean, he was raised by, well, mostly the three women, and then Robin came in later. Um, and so I can't imagine how hard it is for Janelle. I can't imagine how hard it is for everyone else in the family. It's devastating. I
it
mean,
is. It is.
uh,
Um, yeah. So obviously, we send all positive energy out to everyone affected, and yeah, just there's no. It's always. I mean, any death is tragic. We talk about it on this show week after week, obviously. Um, I think the suicides they echo within me in a very deep way. It breaks my heart on a very deep level. And so um yeah, to everyone out there, just know that you're loved, and there's beauty in the world, and people that love you that you may not even know about. Um and times are very tough in the world and in general, but I offer to you that I hope if today was difficult, tomorrow is easier. And that's all we can ever hope for.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was lovely.
Thank you. Um so with that in mind, we're going to continue the story that we started last week, which, of course, is The Keepers, the Netflix documentary. If you missed it, I'd suggest going back to listen to part one of this two-part series before we get into this, because I feel like this is going to be very confusing for you if you have not listened to
Sure.
the first part. So check that out if you haven't already. And just to get everyone up to speed, here's a little backstory for you now. The Keepers is a Netflix crime doc series that follows two former students trying to solve the 1969 murder of their teacher, Kathy Sesnick. Was Kathy attacked by someone she knew, or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and attacked by a stranger? In the conclusion of our two-part episode, we'll deep dive the final two suspects in Kathy's case, as well as the horrific abuse and cover-up by the Catholic Church, which may have been the catalyst for Kathy's murder.
I say may have, but I have very strong feelings
Of course.
about that. Um, so disclaimer, which will automatically show just how different this episode will be from the first one. This episode will contain mentions of suicide, rape, and sexual abuse, and most of the victims involved will be minors. So we don't belabor it. We just present the facts and then we move on. So trigger warning for those who need it. Previously on True Crime and Cocktails, in The Keepers, Part 1, we talked about the murder of Kathy Sesnick, a nun living in Baltimore in the late 1960s. Kathy disappeared on November 7th, 1969, after heading to a mall to buy an engagement present. When Kathy didn't return home hours later, her roommate and fellow nun, Sister Helen Russell Phillips, called a close friend named Jerry Koob. After Jerry and another friend arrived on scene, they waited another hour before calling police. Despite a massive search, no sign of Kathy was found until January 3rd, 1970, when her body was discovered by two hunters in a wooded area about 5 miles away. Kathy was 26 at the time of her death. In the first episode, we talked about two suspects, Edgar Davidson and Billy Schmidt. Today, I've got two more suspects for you, one of which, as I teased at the end of the episode last time, includes a massive, massive cover-up. Oh, so let's get into that dirtbag. Suspect number 3, Joseph Maskell. Now, this man is likely the reason why I needed to make this episode a two-parter, because I could spend hours talking about this creep and what he is accused of. I'm going to try and be as succinct as I can for the sake of time. But again, this man is also the reason why I needed a disclaimer in this episode. So I will, again, do my best not to belabor it. Anthony Joseph Maskell was born April 13th, 1939. He was ordained in 1965, and in 1966, he was stationed at Sacred Heart of Mary, where parishioners wrote a letter to the archdiocese stating they were uncomfortable with Maskell because he would often take young girls to the rectory under suspicious circumstances. At the time, Maskell was working with the Boy Scouts, and numerous parents complained about him, saying that Maskell had asked the boys to describe their sexual fantasies while he filmed them.
Oh, God.
In late 1966, Maskell was made the associate pastor at St. Clement's Church, where in May 1967, a mother went to the archdiocese to accuse Maskell of abusing her son. Days later, Maskell was transferred to Archbishop Keogh High School, where he worked as a school counselor as well as chaplain for the Baltimore Police Department, as well as the Maryland National Guard.
I just have to say, I love that there was complaints about him and children, and he got transferred to work in a high school.
Yep. Oh, you're going to find throughout this, if there's a problem with a priest, they tended to just ship them off somewhere else and go, look, we fixed the problem. And it's no, you may have fixed the problem at that place, but you've now caused other problems for other places. I also love that this guy was ordained in 1966 or 1965, and by 1966 he already was causing problems. So great guy. Maskell stayed at Keogh until 1975 before being assigned to the Archdiocese Division of Schools, where he stayed until 1980. He was then sent to Church of, oh God, how do you even say that? Annunciation? Annunciation? And oh God, oh, it is. He got assigned to another church. It's fine. 2 years later, he went to Holy Cross Parish, where he remained until 1992, when one of Maskell's victims went public with her accusations. At the time of going public, the victim was simply known as Jane Doe, but because of the documentary, we know her name is Jean Wayner. According to Jean, when she was a freshman at Archbishop Keogh in the late 1960s, she went to confession to talk about being sexually abused by her uncle when she was a child. The priest, a man named Neil Magnus, didn't offer Jean any comfort. Instead, the absolute creep asked for incredibly graphic details of the abuse while he masturbated.
Oh, God.
Again, grown man interacting with a teen girl. Absolutely vile. To be clear, acting that way in front of an adult without consent is also gross. Louis C.K., we see you. But when it's in front of a child, it's particularly heinous. I just really thought you'd like my usage of heinous.
Of course.
Uh, when it's a dark episode, you got to find the joy where you can.
You do.
So, Magnus then asked for Jean's name and told her he wanted to see her face. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I think confession is supposed to be anonymous. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, I know for sure it's supposed to be a safe space. And if this isn't bad enough, Magnus then said he wasn't sure he could forgive Jean, despite the fact that she'd done nothing wrong.
Ugh.
A few weeks later, Maskell called Jean into his office to talk about her confession since he was the school counselor. Maskell then told Jean he didn't know if she could be forgiven and that she would need to work with him to rid herself of her sinful behavior.
Ugh.
Again, Jean did nothing wrong, and Maskell and Magnus were simply predators who were taking advantage of someone in a vulnerable position. Now, I said earlier I wouldn't belabor the abuse, but I wanted to give some examples of the things that Maskell did so that we can all be on the same page regarding just how much of a monster that man was. Now, according to Jean, Maskell would pull out his penis and tell her that God wanted her to receive the Holy Spirit, which would come through his body.
Ugh.
He would use his semen to draw a crucifix on Jean and then tell her she needed to swallow the Holy Spirit.
Oh, God.
After one particularly brutal rape, Maskell said to Jean, quote, "I know you hated that. I'm glad."
Oh, my God.
Yeah, again, grown man, and this is a 15, 16-year-old girl. Maskell then started letting other men come to his office and assault Jean, including local politicians, clergymen, policemen, and local business owners. There was also a man only ever referred to as Father Bob, but his real identity was never determined. So, to be fair, I've just mostly ignored Father Bob's existence. Magnus would also take part in this horrific abuse, and sometimes he and Maskell would pray in Latin during the assault. And for those who may question why Jean didn't say anything to anyone about the assault at the time, don't. Just simply don't. She was a teenage girl who was being assaulted by authority figures who were telling her she deserved what she got because she was the one making it happen. And if that isn't understandable enough for Jean to remain quiet, there's also the fact that Maskell outright threatened her. He pulled a gun out of his desk, emptied the bullets, pointed the gun at her head, and pulled the trigger. Maskell then told Jean that if her father knew what was happening, he would do the same thing to her, but he wouldn't take out the bullets. Jean's father was a police officer at the time. So it's no wonder that Jean stayed silent. She believed she deserved the abuse that was happening to her, and she felt like she had no one to go to. And Jean wasn't the only one. It turns out that Maskell abused several girls in his private office at the school every single day. Sometimes the assaults would include the girls being drugged or hypnotized or photographed in some sort of way. Maskell also allegedly forced some of the girls to give themselves enemas while he watched. Yep.
Jesus.
Jean pushed down the abuse to the point where she completely blocked it out. When she ran into a former classmate in the early 90s, Jean was asked if she'd be heading to the next high school reunion. Jean said no, and it made her realize She had very negative and upsetting reactions to the idea of ever being near Archbishop Kehoe again. So she started working on it with a therapist, and memories of the abuse started coming back. Over the period of 6 weeks, Jean recovered memories about the abuses she has suffered. In 1992, she went public with her allegations under the name Jane Doe. But for the lawsuit to move ahead, Jean's lawyers suggested she had to name some of Maskell's other victims because they needed someone who could corroborate Jean's story. So in 1993, Jean's family rallied around her and they hand wrote postcards asking for information about sexual abuse that occurred at Keogh between 1968 and 1975. And they mailed them out to about 1,000 Keogh alumni. Absolute shout out to Jean's siblings for rallying around her. I could not be more relieved to hear that Jean has such an amazing support system. And speaking of which, I usually scold men on this show, especially straight white men. In my defense, I only scold them when they deserve it. But Jean's husband, Mike, had nothing but unwavering support for her. It was incredibly beautiful to see. And since I often only point out things that men do wrong, I wanted to make sure I pointed out this moment because it was very right. He was just absolutely kind and supportive towards his partner. It was incredibly beautiful. To quote a Gatorade commercial from 1991, be like Mike. But in this case, I mean Jean's husband, Mike, not Michael Jordan.
Of course.
Sadly, Jean's husband, Mike, passed away in May 2007. And I didn't write this down, but something Jean had said in the documentary that kind of broke me was she was talking about her husband and how supportive he was, which was very beautiful, and how he would always be there with her anytime she had to go through all these like horrific, like remembering things that she went through and all of that sort of thing. And she said he sat through it all and he had so much anger for it, but he just pushed the anger down. And she's convinced that anger is what led to him having cancer and what led to him dying. And so I just hope she does not blame herself in any way, is my point. It's just, I couldn't be happier that she had the amazing support system, and I'm glad that she still does, even though her husband is now sadly no longer with us. So Jean's family rallies. They send out all these anonymous postcards. One of the first responses to come in came from a woman named Teresa Lancaster, who attended Kehoe in the 60s. Teresa said she first went to Maskell's office because her mother had discovered pot in Teresa's purse, and Teresa wanted Maskell to kind of like calm her mother down. Maskell then contacted Teresa's parents and told them he believed she was schizophrenic and needed a prescription which would, quote, release the devils from her brain.
Wow.
Yep. Maskell also allegedly picked Teresa up from her home, drove her to a wooded area where he allowed 2 police officers to rape her while Maskell stood outside the car.
Ugh.
When Maskell discovered that Teresa had a boyfriend, Maskell forced Teresa to go to a gynecologist's office for what he called a pregnancy check. Maskell not only personally took Teresa to that appointment, but he also stayed in the room for the entire thing. The gynecologist, Dr. Christian Richter, did a pelvic exam on Teresa while Maskell was in the room. Richter then told Teresa that she needed to be douching 3 times a week. Teresa said she didn't know what that was, and Maskell said, "Don't worry, I'll help you." According to Teresa, on subsequent visits, Richter raped her while Maskell watched. Then there were the times that Maskell would rape Teresa while Richter would, quote, do a breast exam.
Ugh.
Richter denied the accusations, saying that he is totally innocent of everything that he is being accused of. When asked about Maskell, Richter admitted that Maskell had brought Teresa to his office for a pregnancy test, and he said he allowed Maskell to remain in the room in absence of her parents. Then Richter made a joke that, well, since Maskell's a priest, it was his only opportunity to see a woman in that position.
Oh, God.
Again, sir, we're talking about a teenage girl. Fucking vile. And yeah, I know we are trusting the girl's word over the adults who claimed innocence, but we believe victims on this show. And there is the fact that an acquaintance of Maskell's, an auto shop owner named Bob Fisher, he said of Maskell, quote, Maskell would say, me and the doctor, we take them back and we give them exams and check them. There's no question he was always involved with the exams. That he made clear. And also, why do I believe the girls over these absolute creepy men? Why wouldn't I? What would they have to gain by making something like that up?
Yeah,
It's also the
exactly.
amount of victims who say very similar stories, even though they've never told anybody. It's like, weird. How could those stories be similar unless they actually happened? So, yeah, I absolutely believe the women. So, not only did Teresa respond to Jean's anonymous postcard, but so did about 40 to 50 other people, whether they were victims themselves or they knew someone who was a victim. Every single postcard mentioned Maskell by name. Keeping in mind, the original postcard did not. It just said anything about sexual abuse happening at this school between these years, and every response mentioned Maskell. So with Jean as Jane Doe and Teresa as Jane Roe, they filed a $40 million lawsuit against Maskell, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and the School Sisters of Notre Dame, or SSND. The defense brought in an expert named Paul McHugh, who claimed that recovered memories were often false. And since Jean's case relied heavily on memories she recovered as an adult, even though they were recovered without the use of hypnosis or any sort of drugs, the case was dismissed. Jean and Teresa then filed a lawsuit against Maskell, Richter, and Archbishop Keogh. When their lawyers wanted to depose Maskell, they learned he had just, quietly moved to Ireland and could not be found. Mm-hmm.
How convenient.
That's absolutely what an innocent person does. And at the time, the state of Maryland had a statute of limitations on child sexual abuse, which meant that the victim needed to file a lawsuit before they turned 38. And before anyone says, why didn't they come forward sooner? I'm also again going to stop you right there. The level of fear and shame that a victim goes through in a situation like that are unimaginable to those who have never been in a similar situation. I'm incredibly proud of both Jean and Teresa for coming forward at all. And speaking of being proud, Teresa went back to school, and while raising 4 children, she became a lawyer at the age of 49. Her husband even built her an office in their basement so she had somewhere to study. Again, shout out to supportive partners. So, I don't have time to get into all the legal crap with depositions and the suits being dropped and that sort of thing. But a few things I wanted to be sure to mention was that Maskell's lawyer called the victims disturbed and confused. And yes, I know as a defense lawyer, you have to defend vile human beings. It's still gross. During a deposition, Maskell's lawyer asked Jean, quote, and you certainly in high school and after high school never considered yourself to be a slut, did you?
What?
Again, I know this is a defense lawyer's job, but to suggest the victim deserved what happened to her because she was a slut is horrifying.
Also, what even is a slut? That's also that's a ridiculous, it's a non,
Yep.
it's completely subjective.
Oh yeah, it's horrifying. And I actually
Horrifying.
cannot believe um that he got away. Like I can't believe that the judge in the room was like, yeah, okay. Like that they I if like as a judge, I would have gone, excuse me? And
Yeah.
this is also why I'm not a judge, but
Which is a shame. Just a
yeah, can you
shame.
imagine that judge show? I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Why I'm not letting anybody call anybody a slut, that's for sure.
No.
Um uh but to the lawyer who did use the word slut, I'm going to quote Taylor Swift and say, "You need to calm down." Due to the lawsuits brought against Maskell, the Archdiocese of Baltimore decided to do their own investigation into Maskell, who had been sent to St. Augustine's in 1993. Maskell was relieved of duties in 1994 when he fled to Ireland because he knew he was a horrible person and could never stand up to the punishment that he deserved. And yes, I know I'm being hard on a man who was never proven guilty in a court of law, but there are enough victims who claim similar stories about Maskell that I don't even feel a little bit bad about how I talk about him. Allegedly, in 1990, while stationed at Holy Cross, Maskell asked the parish's caretaker, William Story, to use a front loader to dig a 10 by 20-foot hole in an abandoned area of the cemetery. Story did as he was asked, and according to him, Maskell then brought multiple loads in a pickup truck of boxes wrapped in plastic. Once the boxes were in the hole, Maskell asked Story to fill it all in. Story said that he looked into some of the boxes and found documents and photos featuring young girls who either had their shirts off or were completely nude. The boxes were later dug up by but the public prosecutor said there wasn't enough information to file charges. The documents recovered were stored in a basement which was flooded during a storm and completely destroyed. We are all completely shocked by this revelation.
Yeah, it's just so rare to hear about boxes of important documents being burned, flooded, just lost. It's not like we hear that almost every other episode on this show.
It's it's to a point where it's too much. Like joke's over.
Joke's over. And you know
Yeah.
what else? Here's what I hope. I hope that in 30 years, when there's true crime podcasts happening, yeah, it's still going to be a genre. I hope that the cases of this era that we live in now,
Yeah.
this will never be a thing because
Oh, yeah.
everything needs to be digitized. Do
Yeah.
I think that that's currently happening? Of course I don't. Of course I don't. They're not digitizing all of these files.
No.
My hope, however, is that that becomes a law. I don't think we'll see it anytime soon, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, all right. Let's take a break, hit the can, grab another drink, and we're going to be back with more on The Keepers Part 2 on this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. 3. That was unnecessary. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing The Keepers. This is part 2 of our two-part series, our Boffo two-part series. Before the break, Christy was telling us about Joseph Maskell and his horrific horrors. What's next?
Well, while the church was doing their investigation into Maskell, the archbishop at the time was a man named William Keeler. He was in the process of becoming a cardinal, so he was very interested in the entire Maskell situation. And the hope, obviously, was it would just go away quietly, so it wouldn't affect him becoming cardinal. Um, and of course, shockingly, Maskell fled the country, and then within that same year, Keeler became a cardinal. But that didn't make the allegations against Maskell go away entirely. Again, the church was doing their own investigation, which resulted in Maskell leaving the church in 1994. And in 2002, Keeler was one of the few bishops in America who willingly released the names of clergy, both living and dead, who had been credibly accused of sexually abusing children. So it seemed as though Keeler was willing to stand up against child abuse in the Catholic Church. Cardinal Keeler side note.
Ooh.
Dante Stokes accused priest Maurice J. Blackwell of sexually abusing him when Dante was a teenage altar boy in the early 90s. In August 1993, Dante went to the police and Blackwell was placed on administrative leave. After an investigation, which did find evidence of abuse, for some reason the case was closed. Blackwell was sent to an institution for treatment and then reinstated. In 2002, frustrated by the lack of discipline in Blackwell's case, Dante snapped and shot Blackwell 3 times, wounding him, but not fatally. During Dante's trial, Cardinal Keeler testified on Dante's defense, making him the first cardinal in the United States to take the witness stand at a criminal trial relating to sexual abuse within the church. Dante was found not guilty of attempted murder in December 2002, but was convicted of gun charges the following year. He served 18 months of house arrest. In 2004, Blackwell was defrocked by the Vatican, and the following year, he was found guilty on 3 counts of sexual abuse stemming from incidents against Dante between 1989 and 1992, as well as other abuses in the 60s and 70s. The fact that this man was a predator for so long, and simply because the crimes were from decades before, and because the defendant was 57, the judge decided to spare Blackwell any jail time, saying, quote, given his age and physical condition, going to a detention center could be detrimental to him. So he was placed on house arrest.
Of course.
More victims have since come forward, including one as recently as 2020, and yet that predator remains on house arrest. I don't care if it's detrimental.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that I'm maybe cold for saying that, but well, too late. I've already said it. So that list of credibly accused clergy that I mentioned before I got distracted with the side note, well, the list featured 56 men, including Maurice Blackwell, Joseph Maskell, and his creep buddy Neil Magnus. When he revealed the list, Keeler said, quote, the simple, painful truth is that the church did not go far enough to protect children from sexual abuse. I humbly ask forgiveness for my mistakes. Please pray for me so I may serve better. So Keeler admits to not doing enough to protect the children of Baltimore, and kind of implied he had no idea that this sort of behavior was going on. Well, prior to being in Maryland, Keeler served as bishop of the diocese in Pennsylvania from 1979 to 1984. During that time, he appointed a priest who sexually abused 5 girls in a single family. When this was brought to the attention of the church, Keeler personally just reassigned that priest to another community. So, absolutely caring about children in his own community. Keeler was mentioned in a 900-page report, which was released by a grand jury in Pennsylvania in 2018. The report claimed that Keeler covered up decades worth of sexual abuse within at least half a dozen dioceses throughout Pennsylvania. I don't have time for Keeler, but he died in March 2017 at the age of 86, meaning he died before the public learned the truth about him. So his death was not celebrated in the way that it should have been, if you catch my drift. We should have been so jazzed that he died, but people were actually sad.
Right.
Anyhow, in August 2023, The Attorney General of Maryland released their own report into the investigation into child sexual abuse and the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The 450-page report listed 156 current or former priests, seminarians, deacons, and teachers at Catholic schools who were accused of sexually abusing over 600 children. Most of these predators escaped any accountability. Maskell's name appears nearly 200 times in the report, and lists at least 39 victims for him alone. The list, which is continually updated, can be found on the Archdiocese website. And just when you think, wow, it's nice to see the Archdiocese finally taking accountability, just 1 month after that report was released, the Archdiocese of Baltimore filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Why? Because they knew the report would lead to a lot of impending child sexual abuse lawsuits. And why specifically file for bankruptcy in September that year? Because as of October 1st, Maryland passed the Child Victims Act of 2023, which removed the statute of limitations on child sexual abuse, which is great, and we are proud of Maryland for doing it. But this means the Archdiocese filed for bankruptcy 2 days before this new law, meaning any survivor coming forward with a lawsuit, their claim will just be part of bankruptcy proceedings. Therefore, the victims won't get to have their day in civil court, and if any payout comes to them, it will be considerably lower than what it would have been. Long story short, too late. Filing for bankruptcy makes it so the church is not held legally responsible for the abuses that those children suffered. And speaking of churches doing absolutely nothing for the victims, when Jean's allegations first came out about Maskell in 1992, the Archdiocese responded by sending Maskell to the Institute of Living, which was a psychiatric facility in Connecticut, where the church allegedly sent their predatory employees. According to the Institute, the Archdiocese would send a priest there and say he was either depressed or had problems with authority. And that was, his big issue. When one of the institute's doctors spoke with a priest, the priest allegedly said, quote, "Oh, I'm not depressed. I had sex with a 14-year-old and I told the bishop and he didn't want it to get out, trying to protect themselves from the embarrassment of the arrest."
Jesus.
Now, since that was a direct quote, I couldn't fix it while I was saying it, so I will fix it now. You, Mr. Unnamed Priest, you, as a fully grown adult, did not have sex with a 14-year-old. You raped her. Get the wording right, because the word sex implies both parties maybe gave consent. Maskell remained at the Institute from October 92 until April 93, when he was released after the psychiatrist who worked with him found, quote, "no psychological or sexual abnormalities." Not to be rude, but either Maskell hid his true self very well during his time at the Institute, or whatever psychiatrist diagnosed him is terrible at their job. Maskell was then assigned to St. Augustine's in August 1993. When asked about the allegations, Maskell denied everything, saying, "I was in shock. I never had sex with a kid." That's because sex with a kid is not a thing. I literally just covered this, Maskell, for the love of God. After Maskell left the Institute, they started getting suspicious about the number of priests who kept getting sent to the Institute. So in 94, the Institute told the Archdiocese that before they would accept any more priests, they needed the priest's full file as well as the complete truth as to why the priest was being sent there. And just like that, the church stopped sending priests to the Institute. Interesting. But the Institute was just one of many psychiatric facilities where clergymen would get sent. For example, a minimum of 30 priests from Pennsylvania were sent to a place called St. Luke's Institute in Maryland, and more went to Southdown Institute in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Wow.
When the allegations against Maskell first came out in 1992, the Archdiocese claimed that it was the first time they'd ever heard any allegations against Maskell. The Keeper's documentary reached out to the Archdiocese and asked if these allegations against Maskell were the first. They responded, yes. Files don't show any complaint before Jane Doe came forward in 1992. The Archdiocese also admitted that Maskell had not received any disciplinary actions prior to 1992. But in the Attorney General's report from 2023 that I mentioned moments ago, it was discovered that the Archdiocese received complaints about Maskell as early as 1966, just 1 year into his career. And yet they did nothing but move him to a new location. Anytime Maskell was accused of wrongdoing, the church simply transferred him to a new place and ignored the victims and their families. Maskell continued to work for the church for 29 years before he left, and by left, I mean fled to Europe to avoid prosecution. And yes, I could absolutely spend hours talking about the Catholic Church and its dark history of abuse and cover-ups, but I won't. I don't even have time to come close to talking about the full scope of this particular topic. But to be clear, it goes without saying that not every Catholic Church has abuse. Not every religious leader is a predator. Are there a lot who are? Absolutely. I'm just letting it known we aren't lumping every Catholic church into the same one. Now, since Jean and Teresa's lawsuits were blocked at every turn, they agreed to enter into mediation with the Archdiocese in 2016 as a last-ditch effort to see any speck of justice. In 2017, Jean, Teresa, and 10 other victims received settlements ranging from $25,000 to $50,000, as well as funding for 2 to 3 years of counseling. And while that is a win, it does not come close to the justice that these victims deserved. Now, before I move on from Maskell, one more thing that leads us back to the death of Kathy Sesnick. When Jean started remembering the abuse that she had suffered, she also remembered a time when she confided in Kathy about the abuse. Jean said she spoke to Kathy in May 1969, shortly before Kathy left Archbishop Keogh. Jean said that Kathy noticed that Jean was upset in class, and when Kathy asked Jean if she liked being at Kehoe, Jean said no. Kathy, who said she had seen Jean going into Maskell's office, asked if someone had made Jean do something she didn't want to do. According to Jean, Kathy said, "I thought as much," and then Kathy said she was going to take care of it. In the fall, Kathy didn't return to Keogh. Maskell told Jean that someone had approached him during the summer to suggest that someone at the school was hurting girls. Maskell then asked Jean if she was the one who'd been spreading the rumors. She said no. Maskell said, quote, "I think we need to reacquaint you with who the real whore in the room is." Yeah, vile man.
Yeah.
Then in November, shortly after Kathy's disappearance, Jean was called to Maskell's office, where Maskell said he knew where Kathy was and asked if Jean would like to see her. According to Jean, Maskell drove her to a wooded area where they walked until they found Kathy's body. Jean said she was in shock and that there were maggots all over Kathy's face. Jean recalls feverishly wiping the maggots away and Maskell saying, "Do you see what happens when you say bad things about people?" Now, so many people called Jean a liar, saying there's absolutely no way that maggots would be present in the winter. I will point out that November 1969 had very mild temperatures, but James Scannell, the police officer who was the first person present when Kathy's body was discovered, said there were absolutely no maggots on the body whatsoever. However, According to the autopsy, maggots were found in Kathy's mouth and trachea, meaning Jean was absolutely right. How would Jean have known about the maggots if she hadn't seen the body? But if there were maggots, why would Officer Scannell lie about it and say that there weren't? Maybe because Scannell described Maskell as, quote, a wonderful priest and a loyal friend. Let's not forget that according to some of his victims, Maskell was allowing police officers to be part of the abuse. I am not suggesting that Scannell was one of those officers. I'm just suggesting that Maskell had a positive relationship with the Baltimore Police Department. Not only was he their chaplain, but his brother, Tommy Maskell, was a lieutenant from 1946 until 1966. And his uncle was a cop prior to that. In fact, his uncle, James Maskell, allegedly tried to assault a woman in 1924. When the woman fought back, Maskell arrested her, and she was sent to prison for a year for biting his face. To that, I say good for her.
Yeah, Jesus.
Then there's the fact that Maskell was said to be good friends with many police officers, often going for drinks with them and tagging along on ride-alongs where he had no business being. Also, according to a member of the Baltimore police, Maskell had a police scanner and a loaded handgun in his car. So for a cop to lie about the state of a body to try and discredit a possible witness is not that big of a surprise to me. Kathy's sister, Marilyn, said she received a letter in Kathy's handwriting postmarked after Kathy's disappearance. Her family called the police as they thought it might be relevant to the case. Marilyn said that a plainclothes officer picked up the letter and a log shows it was entered into evidence. However, no note was ever made as to the contents of the letter, and its whereabouts are now unknown.
Shocker.
So was Maskell responsible for Kathy's death? I honestly think he was involved in some way, but I don't think he personally committed the murder. 2 days before her disappearance, 2 female students from Keogh went to Kathy's apartment to talk about the abuse. Kathy told them it would be taken care of soon. Then, the night before Kathy's disappearance, an unknown female student and her boyfriend went to Kathy's apartment to talk about the abuse the girl had suffered at the hands of Maskell. According to the victim, while they were talking, Maskell and Neil Magnus entered Kathy's apartment without knocking. So the girl and the boyfriend left. The girl is adamant that Helen was at the apartment when this incident occurred. Now, if this is true, Maskell had zero reason to be in that apartment. And again, where was Kathy's roommate, Helen? If she was present, then why was this never mentioned during the police investigation? Is it possible that Maskell threatened her? The girl said that she called into the office the next day and Maskell threatened to kill her and her boyfriend and their families if she ever went public. Maybe he did the same thing to Helen Russell Phillips, or she knew more than she was ever willing to let on. And for those who may find it surprising that students might go to a teacher's home, another nun, Sister Mary Florida, said, quote, I knew several of the kids at Keogh, and one of them described to me how 3 or 4 girls were being abused by a priest and had gone to Sister Kathy for help. There's no question she knew about the abuse taking place during the months leading up to her death. So we know they were going there. Also, the 60s is a completely different time. You're not going to go to a teacher's house now, but at that point in time, it very well could be they trust a teacher more than maybe somebody at home. There's phone books all over the place that give you people's addresses. It wouldn't be hard to find her. So if we trust what these victims are saying, which I do, then Neil Magnus would listen to the girls in confession, pick out any girls who were particularly vulnerable, such as those with terrible home lives or past traumas. He'd then send them to Joseph Maskell, who would use his degree in psychology to manipulate the girls into being quiet about whatever atrocities he would inflict on them. A detective in the case commented that they wanted to talk to Maskell around the time of Kathy's death, but he was never available for an interview. The detective said, quote, "It got to the point where Maskell was the number one guy we wanted to talk to, but we never got a chance." And of course there weren't only the crimes that Maskell got away with. The report that the Maryland Attorney General released in 2023 listed at least 39 victims of Maskell's, none of which will see any justice. Speaking of which, something to mention very quickly is that Maskell had a connection with Joyce Malecki, the 20-year-old woman who was murdered just days after Kathy. Apparently, Joyce and her family attended the Clement Church, where Maskell was a pastor for 2 years. Her family also lived 2 blocks from the rectory where Maskell lived. Maskell also sent Joyce's family a condolence card after Joyce's death. The fact that Maskell seemed to have police in his back pocket and that Joyce's case was never properly investigated feels like a bit of a coincidence, especially when we know that Maskell knew Joyce personally. And whether we're talking about Kathy's case or Joyce's, or even just the horrific things that happened at that school, it's disgusting, and I'm enraged that these men will never be charged with any crimes or punished in any way. Magnus died in 1988, and Maskell died in 2001. Accomplice Dr. Christian Richter died in 2006, and former officer James Scannell died in 2016. Not that I'm saying Scannell was involved, but we know he did lie about the condition of the body, specifically to undermine Jean. In 2023, Maskell's body was exhumed to compare it to the DNA that was collected at the scene of Kathy's death. But his DNA was not a match. However, I would like to point out that the DNA collected at the scene, the only DNA linked to Kathy's death, was extracted from cigarette butts found near the body. So this doesn't mean Maskell wasn't involved in any way. It just means he didn't smoke near her body. He absolutely could have had someone else kill her or simply wasn't there when the body was dumped. The DNA was run through CODIS, but as of this record, no matches have been found. Regarding Kathy's case, the Baltimore police have said nobody has been cleared by us yet. Which brings us to the final suspect in this case, Kathy's close friend, Jerry Koob. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Jerry met Kathy in 1966 when Jerry was an intern at Archbishop Keogh. In the first episode of the documentary, Jerry said he and Kathy were just friends. Then, like episode 6 or 7, Jerry admits he was fully in love with Kathy and that he had proposed to her in 1968 before he was set to be ordained. Jerry said Kathy turned him down, but they remained close friends. When Kathy didn't arrive home, her roommate, Helen Russell Phillips, called Jerry as opposed to the police. It was never said. I assume she called him just to see if Jerry had either seen or heard from Kathy, because otherwise there's absolutely no reason to call Jerry before the police. As soon as Jerry said, "No, I haven't seen her, I'm on my way," Helen should have hung up the phone and then called the police. Would that move have been significant in solving the case? Not likely, but it would have made them a lot less suspicious. In most cases, investigators are quick to look at people closest to the victim, and in this case, Jerry stood out. At one point, he was brought in for questioning, but the police claim the church intervened and demanded that they either charge Jerry or release him. So the interview ended early. And in one of the most batshit things I have heard in my life, Jerry claimed During his interrogation, one of the detectives tossed Kathy's vagina on the table. Yes, her actual physical vagina. Jerry said it was wrapped in newspaper and it looked like a heart. The documentary just glossed over this
That feels impossible to be true.
like it was nothing, right?
Feels impossible to gloss over.
Right, that's the meat of your story right there.
Yeah.
Once he said that, it's like, no, you just, I guess the story's about Jerry now. It's just, the documentary people had the original autopsy report as well as the coroner who performed it. So it would have been very easy to outright ask if the vagina had been removed or not. Also, according to the autopsy, Kathy's body had been out in the elements so long the coroner was unable to determine if she'd been sexually assaulted. But we're supposed to believe they removed her vagina and then saved it in a fridge at the police station or something? It's just madness. Like, if it was true, why would police officers have a victim's vagina removed from her body? What purpose would that serve? And then why would they wrap it like a steak from the butcher and just keep it around the office to show suspects? Why? So, is Jerry lying about this? But if so, why would he make up something so extreme? I mean, maybe the cops were dirty. Maybe Jerry wanted us to think the cops were dirty. Did this really happen or not? I mean, I of course assume that if it really happened, it was some sort of meat or animal products wrapped up and they just told him it was her vagina. But even then, why fake a vagina? Did a detective really think this was a scare tactic that would make Jerry admit to murder? Again, the fact that the documentary just glossed over that like it was a totally normal thing to say was shocking to me. I had to rewind multiple times to verify what I heard. Jerry mentioned it once, a cop denied it ever happened, and then the documentary just moved on. And I will never move on from this news.
Yeah, that's a tough one to move on from.
It's shocking. It's not something you hear every day. I mean, that I watched that documentary weeks ago now, but somehow mentally I'm still there, learning that information again and again as if frozen in time. Like, I still cannot believe he uttered those words. But don't worry, I will allow us to move on because we don't have time to linger, even though it was batshit and I am personally drawn to batshit. 3 former investigators and a detective working Kathy's case all claimed that a big impediment to their investigation was the interference or lack of cooperation by the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Detective Bannon said, quote, "We were absolutely certain we were going in the right direction. If Father Koob didn't do it, he knew who did. We were all very aware of the potential for scandal because of everything that was going on inside the Catholic Church between priests and nuns. As you may recall, Jerry admitted to being in love with Kathy and even proposing to her, but he said that she turned him down and that they remained close friends. Or as Jerry described it, quote, it was a love between two celibates in a commitment to Christ. Which is interesting when, according to Kathy's sister, when Kathy's body was found, Kathy was wearing a ring that Jerry had given her. I don't know if it was the engagement ring or not, but it was engraved on the inside. And Jerry even confirmed the ring was from him. But ring or not, Jerry insisted they were simply platonic friends. Jerry has taken and passed 2 lie detector tests since the murder. However, we know those aren't fully reliable, And I'm not saying Jerry harmed her in any way. In fact, I truly believe he genuinely loved Kathy. But Jerry also got caught in a few lies, like saying they were only platonic friends, but also admitting in an interview in September 1969, they quote, attempted sex, but it was unsuccessful.
Interesting.
And I get it. It was the 60s and premarital sex was frowned upon, especially with priests and nuns. But it was decades ago, Jerry. Just admit to it, because being caught lying makes you look suspicious. Jerry claims Kathy requested to meet him on November 8th to have a serious conversation. He said he hoped it would mean she was reconsidering his marriage proposal. Kathy, of course, went missing November 7th, so the serious conversation never happened. Jerry then claimed that maybe Kathy was going to tell him about the abuse that was happening with Maskell. Couple of things. There was a letter found at Jerry's apartment that had been written by Kathy a few days before her death. A few quotes from that letter. And this was Kathy, quote, "My very dearest Jerry, if ever I should leave you is playing on the radio. I'm all curled up in bed. My period has finally arrived 10 days late, so you might say I'm moody. My heart aches so for you." Now, based on that quote alone, I'm not an expert, um, but I am a woman who has had sex followed by a late period 2 months later. So to me, if they had sex in September and Kathy wrote a letter in November being relieved that her period finally arrived, almost makes me think that maybe there was a brief moment Kathy might have thought she was pregnant.
Yeah.
I could absolutely be wrong, but I think many women have panicked over a late period after intercourse. So even though Jerry continually tried to deny that sex ever happened, I think the letter is telling us that it did.
Right.
A few more lines from that letter, quote, I just uh I just wait on you, your time and your need even more than I had before. I think I can begin to live with that more easily now than I did 2 months ago, just loving you within myself. Another quote, I must tell you, I want you within me. I want to have your children.
Wowzer.
Now, I'm no expert, but this sounds like Kathy absolutely wanted to be with Jerry and that she outright told him as much. So then, is it possible the serious conversation was going to be about the abuse? Is it possible they were going to be together? Maybe Kathy maybe they were both going to give up uh, nun and priesthood and get together, or maybe she was looking for Jerry's help with the stuff going on with Maskell, and they wanted to make it public. Jerry claims he knew nothing about the abuse that happened at Kehoe until Jean went public in 1992. But what if, for the sake of speculation, what if Jerry was lying? What if Kathy did tell him about it? What if he got angry and told her to keep quiet and the church was not only protecting Maskell, but they were also protecting Jerry? Do we have any confirmation that Kathy wanted to meet Jerry on November 8th? Are we just trusting him on that? Maybe she really asked to meet him on November 7th. And she just told her roommate she was going shopping for something and
Right.
she was actually meeting with him. Jerry's friend Pete McKeon confirmed Jerry's alibi the night of Kathy's disappearance. Peter told police that he and Jerry had gone for dinner and then to a movie. Peter passed a polygraph test and was able to provide a receipt for the meal and ticket stubs for the movie, which was allegedly at 7 p.m. It ran for 95 minutes. The Manresa building was 26 miles away, so like a 50-minute drive. Pete said they arrived home around 10:30 and had a nightcap until midnight when they got the call from Helen. As I mentioned in the first episode, the theater where they saw that movie was only 6 miles from Kathy's apartment. You could easily go to a movie theater, get the ticket to seem like you were there, and then leave.
Exactly.
So, Pete said that Helen called Jerry about Kathy when they arrived back at Manresa. And look, it's more than possible that if Jerry was involved, uh, either so was Pete or Pete was willing to cover for his friend. I find it interesting that Helen says she called Jerry at 11 p.m., but Jerry says the call actually happened closer to midnight. I need to believe that police checked phone records to verify who was accurate, but I mean, who knows when it comes to this case. And I'm not saying that Jerry was involved in Kathy's death. What I'm saying is Jerry possibly lied about not knowing about the abuse. How do I know? Because some of the abuse allegations made by Kehoe students were against Jerry.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, these are just allegations. Nothing has been proven yet, but one victim claims she was sexually assaulted by Maskell, Magnus, and a third man who was simply known as the Jesuit intern. Years later, the victim saw a picture of Jerry and said he was the intern. Jerry was an intern at Archbishop Kehoe in 1966, leaving in the spring of 1967. That was the only year they brought in Jesuit interns. Another victim said Maskell and the intern assaulted her with objects that have left permanent damage. She said Jerry was in the room for at least one incident and that he participated in another. A third victim also came forward accusing Jerry. However, that girl wasn't at Kehoe until 1971. Jerry had left by that point. It, of course, doesn't mean he didn't stop in for a visit. He lived nearby. The victim ended up transferring to a public school following the abuse from Kehoe. As of this record, Jerry Koob's name is not mentioned on the Archdiocese website. It was also not mentioned in the 2023 report by the Attorney General. Jerry denies the allegations and has stated he never personally met Joseph Maskell. Jerry left the Jesuit priesthood in 1979 and became a Methodist minister. That same year, he met a fellow minister named Diane. The two were married the following year and would later have 2 daughters. The family moved to New Jersey, and Jerry and Diane remained married for 40 years until her death in 2021. But if Jerry is involved in any way with Kathy's death, that would mean that Kathy's roommate, Helen, would know more than what she's saying, especially given that Helen called Jerry that night long before calling the police. Is it possible Kathy told Helen about the abuse at the school, and Helen worried about the police involvement, so she called Jerry first because he was a trusted friend? Helen Russell Phillips left the convent shortly after Kathy's death. She ended up getting married, having kids, and working as a teacher for the public school system. When Helen learned about Maskell's death in 2001, she said he went to his grave with his secret. Helen died just days after Maskell. Pete McKeon died in September 2020. Like Helen, Pete left the religious order and went on to have a family and work as a public school teacher. So Jerry is now the only person still alive who was at the apartment the night that Kathy disappeared. Is it possible that Jerry doesn't really know anything? If he cared for Kathy as much as he seemed to, I'd like to believe he would have come forward by now if he knew who was involved. Maybe he just rubbed me the wrong way because of something he said about Kathy. Jerry said, quote, "She was such a gentle person that she wouldn't have resisted an attack. She wouldn't have struggled. She would have been frozen like a bird." I'm sure he meant it in a nice way, like a she was so kind she wouldn't hurt a fly type of a way. But he just came across sounding like Patrice's husband, um, from Unsolved Mysteries 13 Minutes, aka the very first episode we ever did.
Yeah.
So deep cut there. It just again, there's just something slightly off about him. And also, you don't know somebody's fight or flight.
No.
Like it's also wild to say like she would have been frozen. Like I don't know, it's weird. Anyhow, my final random nugget of info for the day. In 1988, Archbishop Keough High School, where Kathy taught prior to her death, combined with Seton High School to become Seton Keough. The school did permanently close in June 2017. Reporting for this two-part episode, I'm Christy Oxborrow.
Wowzer. What a ride. Let's take one more break, hit the can again, grab another drink, and we'll be back with our final thoughts on the Keepers Part 2 episode of True Crime and Cocktails. Up on three. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing The Keepers Part 2. Oh my gosh, where to even begin? Again, as I mentioned in the first part of this two-part Boffo series, I have seen all of this documentary, but it was many, many years ago, so I forgot a lot of it, and I
Sure.
forgot about all of this. I mean, again, it's so overwhelming. I'm sure my brain was like, "You don't need to keep this story in your mind. This is horrifying. This is a horror show." Um, but again, all of these details are just truly, truly awful.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to me, again, you know, Jean's story and her family sending out those postcards, and the fact that every single person that responded specifically named him, it just feels like where there's smoke, there's fire. We also know that there was complaints made in the early part of his career, 1966. Again, we also know that he got moved after the complaints into the high school. So again, like this whole idea that it's like there was no record of any of this. It's like, but there was. But there was. And also, we all know the Catholic Church doesn't have a great track record with this stuff. So, I don't
Correct.
know. Um, I mean, there's so many details. Obviously, like the idea this Cardinal Keeler, who had a real kind of vested interest in making this go away as he was trying to get his own kind of, you know, um, campaign running. Didn't want that affected. I don't know. I don't know. The fact that we also know, I mean, again, it's just more of the same. All of the things about this institute where they were sending priests, again, the fact that the institute was like, "Hey, you're sending a lot. We're gonna need to know what each person's, like, kinda deal is," and they're like, "Forget it." Like, it's just
Yeah.
it all feels so impossibly obvious, you know?
100%.
I the detail that Maskell and Magnus were seen entering Kathy's apartment without knocking, chilling to me.
Yeah.
Chilling.
Especially because at that point, they were not part of the school anymore. Not that
Right.
that would have given them, cause to do that, but it doesn't make sense. It's like the 2 aren't connected anymore, so they have no reason to be there, let alone to walk in without knocking.
Right. It's very odd. Um, it's also the fact that there was so many potential allegations, which we know from later from Jean and her family and their whole thing. There was so much that was going on potentially at that time. There's a multitude of students who could have come to Kathy, who we know was beloved. There's nothing but motive. I guess that's the other thing because we were talking about this last week too, and it's like, what is the motive for these different people? Like Maskell at this
Sure.
point to me has a clear motive,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is the students are confiding in her. Maybe she was trying to stand up to him. Um, that's I mean, right there. That's the clearest motive I think of the bunch.
Oh, 100%.
And the fact that he was, potentially seen going in there with Magnus, it also does feel like the fact that Helen potentially was there and then said later upon his death was like, well, he died with his secret, and then she died a couple days later. Like,
Her
it all
dying so
feels,
soon after him is wild to me.
yeah, yeah. And also too, it just feels like, and Christy kind of alluded to this in the break also, I don't wanna take credit for this thought, but, like, it's interesting that then she left the church.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what, feasibly, I mean, listen, it could have been just enough that Kathy died that made her, like, change her life or whatever.
Sure.
But also, it's interesting this idea that perhaps she was getting threatened or bullied, like, it all feels like that is more than possible in terms of, right?
Oh, 100%, especially if she knows that it was the church is related somehow, it was Maskell, it was all hidden, whatever, or Maskell either did it himself or had someone kill Kathy or whatever. It could be enough for her to be like, "Well, I've lost my faith in the church. I can't be here anymore."
Right.
So it's the fact that she left the church and Jerry's friend Pete left the church, and then Jerry left the church he was with and switched. I think, what did I say? He became Methodist or something. Like he changed religions. And so it just felt like, why is everyone close to Kathy running away from the church now?
Yeah.
What do you know about them that we don't?
Right. Right.
And really, Maskell seems more like someone who would ask someone to do something.
Yeah.
But so I'm not convinced he physically did it, but he knows who did it because I'm absolutely convinced he had it done.
Right. Well, yeah. Look, I can't believe that I'm even gonna get into this.
The vagina.
Yeah. So, couple of things. I look, I hear myself before I even speak, but go with me.
Mhm.
Is it possible that the reason in the autopsy they were like, we can't determine if sexual assault happened was because they felt that she was left out in the elements and whatever, when in reality, that could have been because it was removed? I don't even know how to discuss this.
I mean,
At the time of the murder is my question.
it's possible, and it's possible that animals were drawn to it because they're going to be more drawn to like a fresh wound
Right.
before they touch other skin. I have nothing to base that on. I
Yeah,
don't know why I said it
yeah,
as though it was fact.
I like it.
Absolutely nothing to base that on. I just assumed that a predator would be drawn in by the scent of blood, so they'd go for that. But now I'm like, that feels, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm just
Again,
surprised they didn't even bother asking. Like, ask the guy while you have a camera. And I'd also like to read what is listed as the for the autopsy. I'd like to list what it says.
yeah,
Because you would think that it would outright say, like, all of the organs that they checked or whatever, or this organ appears to possibly not be there, or whatever they're going to say.
go with me once more.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, hypothetically, we're speculating Maskell is behind this.
Sure.
We know, given the reports from his victims, that he was quite brutal. So, A, do I believe that someone who engaged in assaulting multiple young girls every day and the details of which are absolutely vile, do I believe that that person could think to do something as truly twisted and sick as that? I think that's possible. We
Sure.
hear a lot on this show.
Yeah.
Um, Here's my next question.
Mm.
What
Mhm.
was Dr. Richter's alibi that night?
Oh, interesting.
Because if we're getting into the female genitalia and we have a sicko gynecologist
Yeah.
just going to go out on a limb here and say, is it possible that that was that person was involved in some way? How would you even go about removing a vagina? It's
I
such a
don't know.
bizarre concept. And then I guess the other question would be, then it's kept somewhere and given to the police at some point in order for this to happen with Jerry Koob. So
Yeah.
the bottom line is this. If Jerry Koob is telling the truth,
Mhm.
then the police know who did it, right? How else, like, where else did they get it? Like, what did they even say to him? We found this in your home?
Yeah, it's weird. I can't even comprehend. I mean, what did they think it was gonna do? If saying that whether it was the real vagina or just something that they were claiming was a vagina. Because let's face it, how many men in the 60s would be able to see an organ laid out and be like, that's a vagina? You know what I mean? Like, so it's just, why? Like, I just, what? Even if, let's say it's true,
Yeah.
whether it was an actual vagina or something they pretended was a vagina. We'll say that Jerry thought it was a vagina. What was that gonna do? Like, did they bring it up and we're like, if you don't confess to it, we're gonna test this. And if your DNA is anywhere near it, we'll know you had sex with her and you're lying.
Yeah, it's a great point because if it wasn't real, then think about what had to go into these cops' minds. Hey, what can we get to look like it's this? Let's figure that out and then wrap it in a newspaper and slap it on a table in order to try and intimidate a witness into confessing to something. Like, look, cops do a lot in interrogations. We've seen it a million times on this show.
Sure.
Um, I haven't heard of falsifying this kind of evidence.
Sure.
It's pretty bold. It was the '60s, so maybe is it possible there was a renegade cop? I think that's possible. And then the bigger point being, and I know you touched on this, but I need to touch on it. If this and I love that I'm like, it's easier for my brain to actually believe that this happened
Sure.
because why would Jerry Koob make that up? It's so specific and vile and I don't know, atypical. We don't hear about. I think that's a first
Yeah.
in 160 some episodes of this show. Like I just and I think the biggest point of all, which you made very clearly, and I just have to back you up, is you glossed over that, huh? Like that feels like that would be, I don't know if I was a
Yeah.
documentarian, no shade, but I feel like I'd want to
Oh,
maybe look into that. Maybe
stretch that out just a scotch
just I don't know, maybe try and get to the bottom of
of that.
is that true? I don't know. I mean, when
Yeah.
Jerry Coop has these lie detectors, were those lie detectors given by the police? Can we strap him to a machine to lie detect him about this vagina thing?
I mean, again, so many questions. Um, it's just so shocking to me that something that shocking would be said, and they don't give you time as a viewer to digest it and go, okay, wait,
Yeah.
what? So I went back multiple times to make sure I heard what he said. And then they did go to a cop where they were like, he said this happened. And the cop was like, absolutely not. And then they were like, cut to an outside scene. It's daytime. We're moving on. And I'm like, wait, what?
So also, is the cop going to admit that it was true? Like, there's no way.
Oh,
Like, that's not like debunking anything.
oh yeah. Well, and it's also, it's not like it was a cop that was part of it. Like this is a cop now as opposed to not a cop then. So this was a cop that was like, no, that wouldn't have like he was pretty much ready to be like faking vaginas is not a thing.
And you know what?
Faking
But
vaginal evidence is not a thing. It's
well,
just it's obscene. Like it's insane.
but that's also, again, this is through the lens of somebody now. Who knows what they were doing back in the 60s? Who
Sure.
knows? There's no way to know. There's no way to know. The bottom line is this to me. If it was real,
Yeah.
then then the police know who did it. Period. So then again, are they slapping it on the table if that's the case to intimidate Jerry Koob because they're trying to cover up for someone else? They're trying to pin it on him when they know it was Maskell
Sure.
or someone else? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the only if it was real, then to me the biggest point of all, other than the true barbarity and all of the above surrounding the act, um, the big point to me would be, why isn't Jerry Koob saying that? That's what doesn't add up to me, because the first thing I immediately thought was, well, if they really had that, then they would have to know who did it. Or they would have to have a really good idea because they would have had to search someone's home to find it. It would have been found somewhere that potentially would lead to some level of arrow pointing to something, like, right? In order for it to have
Yeah.
been maintained, like, in order for it to not have decomposed. Now, again, we also don't know what state this was in. The whole thing is confounding to me. I can't let it go. I'm just like,
Nope.
this is the thing for me. This is the
Yeah.
thing that will keep me up at night because it does not make any sense to me.
Right.
Doesn't make sense for it to be real. Doesn't make sense for it to be fake. Doesn't make sense for it to be lied about.
Like it was such a blip in that episode that I almost wonder if they just debated putting it in at all. And it's like, well, you made the right call putting it in. But at the same time, I don't know what to do with the information now that you've given it to me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Well, and
like
listen, I'm going to pause on that because this takes me into the next my next point, because this was about Jerry Koob. The fact that he said at one point, we attempted sex once, but it was unsuccessful. But then we have this letter to Jerry from Kathy. Now, I had a different interpretation of what she was saying than you did.
sure.
So you were talking about how her heart aches for him, and she was saying about my period is 10 days late. And what it sounded like to me, and I may have misheard, but what I heard was that she was like irritated about it. So I interpreted it as she was hoping to be pregnant,
Oh, sure.
which, listen, no way to know. But then you went on to talk about the other letter, I believe, in which she said, I want to have your children. So then that brings me back to my initial point, which is, what if that first letter she was writing to him, she was sad that her period came?
It's possible.
Now, the only reason I bring this up, and this is because, again, on this show, we trust no one. With everyone's, we're not. You have to investigate absolutely everything. Is that enough of a motive? Because we know Jerry was holding on to them being a celibate couple. that it was like we were celibate together, loving God, but we also know that he gave her an engraved ring. And then we also know that it comes
Yeah.
out that maybe they tried to have sex once, but that it was unsuccessful. Then maybe the truth is that they did have sex because again, it seems like from this letter with her saying her period was late, that does seem to connect to they had had sex, especially when she goes on to later say, I want you inside of me, something along those lines, and I want to have your children.
Yeah.
Is it possible? This is me just looking for motive. Is it possible she was pushing him or had told somebody that they had slept together? He panicked because at that point he still wanted to remain in the priesthood in some way.
Sure.
Is that possible? Again, in the grand scheme of anything being possible, of course it's possible. Anything's possible. The only other thing that I would say along those lines is if it were me investigating this case, I'm not just going by Peter's receipt and ticket stubs because did anyone at the restaurant place them there? Is there anyone to corroborate this story? He could have gone to dinner with anybody and had a receipt. There's nothing that proves that that means it was Jerry that was with him other than his word.
Yeah, he could have absolutely, because they were in that close of a vicinity, he could have met with Kathy
Right.
and then been like, "Oh, well, I can't say I was with her, so you have to say you were with me."
Right. And great point. And also the movie ticket stubs, to your point, you could go and buy them and not even see the movie necessarily. Could have left the movie early. And
Yep.
also, to my point, he could have been there with anybody. Peter could have taken anybody to that movie. The only thing, because this is also the 1960s, we're not going to have the same kind of surveillance cameras or,
Sure.
somebody's filming a TikTok and somebody walks through the background, coincidentally. Like we are not going to have any of that kind of additional evidence to corroborate. So then the only other thing we're basing this on is other eyewitness accounts, to which I say, were there any other people questioned?
Good
Was this
question.
corroborated in any way, or were they just because here's the thing, and this is me, I'm contradicting myself all over the place. But if the police were trying to cover up for Maskell, hypothetically,
Sure.
it would be very easy to implicate Jerry Koob because of all of the holes that we've just poked in this alibi.
And if you have the vagina, put it in his fridge somewhere.
Well, this is the
Do a
thing,
search of his house, and it's like, "Oh, look what we found."
right? So
Not that
again,
I'm
to me,
suggesting cops should be dirty. I'm
of
just,
course not.
you
But
know.
we're talking about in a world in which they're trying to set somebody up.
Yes.
I don't get it. Because then it makes me say, if they have this, yes, they have this alleged piece of evidence, and Jerry's story kind of has these holes in it.
Yeah.
And we can kind of come up with a motive based on her letters. I mean, there have been convictions made on less. Not that there should be. It's just, again, it doesn't make any sense to me. So then, with all of that, you're going to love where I'm going with this. It comes back to, is the vagina real? Because again, I just feel like, again, I don't know. I remember now why I was so confounded by this documentary and then it made me join that Facebook group because I just feel like it just feels like there's something it feels like there's something missing, obviously.
Sure.
It's a shame that I feel like we'll probably never find out.
Oh, no, not especially if Jerry's the last one left that could tell us anything.
And ultimately, the fact that there was allegations also against Jerry in terms of abuse, the fact that we have heard allegations that the police were involved in some of this abuse. I think the biggest thing of all is the just the true level of tragedy here. It's like you're never going to know the truth because everybody has something to hide.
Yeah.
Potentially, everybody on every side is guilty. Think about our other past suspects in the last episode. These men coming home covered in blood from bar fights, allegedly. These, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's I'm saying this not in the way that I typically do, but in a sense, they all did it because they're, or rather, they're all being accused of crimes. everybody involved here.
Yeah.
So it kind of starts to become depressing is an understatement, but it's like, who do you trust when everyone has been implicated in allegedly committing a crime, including the
Sure.
people investigating the crime?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like the Joyce Malecki who died like 4 days after Kathy went missing, and how her case was just never investigated at all.
Right.
And it just feels like, who's connected to that? And why did that not get looked into at all? And then it's like, did it not get looked into because it involved someone in the police department? Was Maskell somehow involved in that one as well? And that's why that one kind of got shoved aside. It's just, it's madness.
It's madness. It's absolute madness.
And how are we supposed to do our jobs if they didn't do their jobs in the first place?
Well, that's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And on that note, we thank you so much, dear listeners, for going with us on this Boffo two-part series on the Keepers. We so appreciate you coming along for the ride, as always. If you haven't already, give us a follow on the socials on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at True Crime and Cocktails, on Twitter at Not Detectives. If you'd like some bonus content, some extra episodes, some live streams, all of the above, go over to patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails to learn more about our subscription-based service over there. And of course, the only place for True Crime and Cocktails official merch is truecrewmerch.com. So check that out as well if you haven't already. Christy, do you want to tell the people about next week's episode? Because I know you're excited about it.
Easily my favorite thing I've ever written
I can't wait.
as far as an episode goes. On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Scandal, Home Improvement.
Who knew, not me, that there is
Yeah.
enough scandal surrounding the TV series Home Improvement, and our gal, your bitch Christy, is going to bring us all the goods like she always does. I truly cannot wait for that episode. When she told me about that idea, I said we need to do it as soon as possible. She told me it was already on the schedule. I could not be happier.
Yeah.
You truly come alive when you curate an episode, and I cannot wait for that.
Oh, this one, because it involves television, and the 90s, I came alive. Like, I've never written notes so fast.
I love it. I love it.
Mm.
Well, listen, we cannot wait for that. And thank you for your work today, as always. Truly exceptional. A 12 out of 10.
Oh, it's high praise.
I only say the truth. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Good night, Scott Lawton.
Good night to my old knees.